So moving into the second layer of the pyramid then, the underserved
Yes.
needs. I know you talk about problem space versus solution space a lot.
Yes. What I like to do is explore the problem space with your team, suspend disbelief and judgment, brainstorm what are all the different ways we could help these customers with this onion of market opportunity needs. Once you've got that problem space definition, we still haven't evaluated any of these yet, right? So that's where the importance versus satisfaction framework comes in. How important is this need, low to high? And how satisfied are they with how they're getting it met today, low to high? And you end up with 4 quadrants. The whole point is you want to avoid going after trying to address any low importance needs. Low importance needs don't create much customer value. High importance needs create customer value, right? And so again, nobody does it on purpose. They go and say, let's build this solution, not realizing that it either doesn't solve a problem or it solves a low importance problem, right? And then the other 2 interesting quadrants are high importance, high satisfaction. So high importance is better than low importance, but it's high satisfaction. So people are telling you, yeah, it's an important need, but I already have a solution that I'm happy with. That's a really tough quadrant to compete in. That's basically a competitive market. And that's where you kind of need some breakthrough disruptive innovation, right? You hear people say you need to be 10x better than the competition. That's where you need to be 10x better. The quadrant where you don't necessarily need to be 10x better is in the upper left, which is the opportunity quadrant. So you have high importance and low satisfaction. So customers are literally telling you, yes, this is a very important need, and I have not yet found a solution. The solution I'm using today is low satisfaction, or I've not found a high satisfaction one, right? And that's where opportunities lie. So if you do nothing else, first start with problems before you do solutions. Run this quick, you can do it with Post-it notes with your team without talking to any customers, and try to find a need that's in the upper left quadrant for that segment. If you do those 2 things, you're going to de-risk your risk of failure significantly. So it's kind of like my 2 main tips, having taught my workshops so many times, like those are the 2 main things. If you take nothing else away, just do that. And then now it's a simple matter of execution because you found a need that's going to create a lot of value.
Welcome to the Product Development Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Wakeling. In this episode, I'm joined by Dan Olsen, who's author of the Lean Product Playbook. He's also host of the Lean Product Meetup, which features many leading voices across the product space. In today's episode, we'll be exploring his concept of the product market fit pyramid, diving into each layer and describing how you can apply it into your product and business to find product market fit. So Dan, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Adam, great to be here.
So can you guide the listeners and viewers through your journey in terms of product, where it started to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. Real quick. So, it really started back when I was a kid. My parents got me a computer when I was like 9. So I was playing games on it, dabbled with coding and stuff. So I kind of was comfortable with computers. I was electrical engineering major, also working on like coding and computer design. And then the first job I did out of Navy was actually out of the college, was in the Navy doing nuclear submarine design, which in hindsight was just very technical product management. I didn't realize it at the time, but basically we were trying to create a complex product, a submarine propulsion plant. And we had a matrix organization with split responsibilities. You had to coordinate, and formally collaborate with them. And so after doing that for 5 years, I knew I wanted to get more on the business side of things, get more into tech and software. And so I got accepted to Stanford Business School. That's what brought me out here to Silicon Valley, where I've been living ever since. And in business school, I learned about this new career that was emerging called product management. The more I learned about it, the more exciting it sounded. I had never done it, so I asked people, where's the best place to learn? Everybody said Intuit. So I was fortunate to get a job at Intuit, where I did learn tons about product management. I worked there for a while, got promoted to a product leader, and after about 5 years, had kind of learned pretty much most of what Intuit had to teach me. And I was excited to go apply what I had learned in startup settings. So I was a product leader at some startups. I also was a co-founder of my own startup. Along the way, I stumbled into being like an interim VP of product for startups and also speaking. And so those 2 things kind of led to the book, the Lean Product Playbook. And how I spend my time these days pretty much is speaking on podcasts like this or at product conferences. I'm glad to see the in-person events are back now that COVID's behind us. It's a lot of fun. And teaching a lot of private workshops for corporate companies, right? Product management has exploded in the last 4 or 5 years. So I have all these product people. You can't, it's really hard. You can't really get a formal degree. I think CMU offers it for like 20 or 30 people a year. But other than that, it's really hard to get trained in it. So private workshops from thought leaders tend to be one of the top things that people do. So I really enjoyed that. I was just listening to a friend's book about find your passion. And I really love teaching people and sharing best practices, which, as you mentioned, the Lean Product Meetup last night we had is another forum to do that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, it was. Yeah, in terms of the book itself, what was the real impetus to write that book? And I suppose, can you give the elevator pitch for what you're trying to achieve with doing that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, so, again, I've always emphasized learning in my career. Along the way, I got a master's in industrial engineering before I got my MBA. And what led me to kind of stumbling into being an interim VP consultant was I decided to go back, in 2005 and learn all the web programming languages since I didn't know them, right? So I just embraced learning and I like sharing best practices. And by being a consultant, instead of working in one company, I actually accelerated my learning. I got to see a lot more instances and examples of what this team's doing right, what this team's not doing right. Why are they getting product market fit? Why are they not getting product market fit, right? And interacting, kind of like a samurai sword. Every talk I would give to PMs, they would ask me questions and I would go back and hammer it more, add slides, refine it, iterate it, And so after doing that for 6 years, and there was one time in particular, there was like a very smart, inquisitive workshop team. And they said, well, what do you do first? And what do you do next? So they started thinking they wanted more like step-by-step instructions and started thinking about, well, there is kind of a process. Obviously the details vary but there's at a meta level, there's certain things you need to get right to achieve product market fit. So it's really a culmination of my speaking and consulting and interacting with product people and the questions that they ask and applying what I had learned. And I always wanted to kind of document best practices. And the book itself, it's really a guide on how to achieve product market fit. One of my savvier reviewers said, sounds like you're trying to apply the scientific method to product development. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much what I am, because my background is like science and engineering. Unfortunately, creating products is not as black and white as physics or, mechanical engineering, or you can just kind of predict stuff, it's a little fuzzier and gray, but you can apply those principles. So in a way, it's a bit more like poker, where there's a mix of skill and luck. But so that's kind of what led to it. Yeah. And a publisher reached out to me, and that kind of, writing a book is a major task. I remember one January 1st, I was like, yeah, I'll write a book. And I made a project plan. I didn't write a single word. So having a contract kind of helped have a forcing function to actually write it. And in the process of writing, it was great. There's a great book out there called Deep Work. I got to do deep work because I got to focus on it. That's when the pyramid really came together. There were inklings. It wasn't a pyramid. There were inklings, like precursors that weren't as polished or refined. And it was in the process of writing the book that I kind of was able to create some of those new key frameworks.
Well, maybe a good time to give a general overview of what that pyramid looks like. So can you just describe all the way from the bottom to the top in the kind of the key concepts that you were trying to convey, and then we'll dive into each one of those in a bit more detail.
Sure. Yeah, let me share my screen so I think a visual reference would be helpful.
Yeah, if anyone listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything else, feel free to head over to YouTube and watch the video and subscribe.
I will describe it so that those people can get it without a picture. No, I can't. I listen to audiobooks all the time, so I make it right. Great. So it's the product market fit pyramid. It's in the shape of a pyramid, and it has 5 layers. And the way to think about it is these are the 5 hypotheses that you need to get right enough. They don't have to be perfect, but they need to be right enough in order to achieve product market fit. Said another way, if any one layer is significantly off or wrong, it's going to preclude you from achieving product market fit. And if product market fit sounds like a fancy word, just think successful product, right? A product that's going to really create value for customers, going to meet customer needs in a way that's better or different than the other products that are out there. The foundation of the pyramid, everything, and by the way, like a real pyramid, each layer is intended to build on the layers beneath it. The foundation, where we start, is the target customer. Everything starts with the target customer. And, I mentioned I'm kind of like a science and math geek. I literally think of it as a function. Things are a function of the customer. You change the customer segment we're talking about, everything above can change, right? So that's it basically. The second layer above that is underserved needs. And there are 2 words there. Needs are important because we want to focus on needs. Far too often, I talk a lot about this in my talks, teams rush into solutions, right? They rush into solutions, and we want to talk about customer needs, benefits, problems before we go into solution space. And then there's the word underserved. It's like, how do we decide which of these needs are the biggest opportunity? That's one of the unique things about my approach is I actually provide a pretty easy to use but powerful framework for how to have a rational discussion with your team about that and reach some conclusions. Taken together, those 2 layers, the target customer and the underserved needs, are the market, part of the product market fit pyramid, right? And if you look in an economics or marketing textbook, it'll say market's a group of people that share a set of common needs. The product layers that live above that start with value proposition. In an ideal world, your value proposition is tightly coupled to those underserved needs that you're hoping to address, and you're doing a good job addressing them. But we don't know yet, so we kind of leave a gap there. Your value prop is, okay, what customer needs are we going to promise that are to customers that our product delivers on, and how is it going to deliver more value than the other products that are out there, right? That's your value prop. It's also synonymous with product strategy, right? It's like, what's your differentiation? How are you going to be better, different? The next layer up, the second product layer, is your feature set or functionality, right? The way I think about this is customers use the features in your product to enjoy the benefits that are in your value proposition. And then finally, the top layer is user experience, right? And the way I think about it is customers interact with the UX to use the features in your feature set to enjoy the benefits in your value proposition. And product market fit is just, okay, we're targeting this market, this set of customer with this set of needs, and we've made these decisions in the product space about value prop, feature set, and UX design. How well do our decisions and execution in the product space resonate with the market that we're going after? So in a quick summary, that's the product market fit.
Great. The first layer then, the target customer.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What are the essential components in understanding who you're trying to target and kind of what their personas look like?
Yeah, for the customer and the needs layer, I love using the metaphor of an onion, right? Because and if we have any Shrek fans, it's like ogres are like onions. They have multiple layers, right? So what happens a lot in the product world, the trick to delivering a lot of customer value and having a successful product is peeling the onion many layers. Companies and teams that are really good, what does that mean? That means you get very detailed about your target customers. You don't just say our target customer is millennials. Our target customer is fintech companies, right? Our target customer is lawyers in Latin America. Like those are starts. That's the outer layer of the onion. You see, like you gotta peel the onion and get more specific, right? And so the tool that we use to peel the onion is market segmentation techniques. And these have been around for a while. Luckily, again, Intuit was very savvy about marketing. So I learned about this there, where you can segment things, the customer base demographically, right? Age, gender, education, income. For B2B, there's firmographics like size of company, industry, geo, things like that. And one thing to think about here is correlation versus causality. Most people jump to demographics or firmographics because it's the easiest to get your head around. It's usually the least causally related. It's usually correlated, but not causal. Second category is psychographic, right? If demographic is who you are, psychographic is like, what do you believe, what's important to you? That can be helpful. The third category is behavioral. If psychographic is what you think and believe, behavioral is what you actually do. And as we know, humans sometimes tell us one thing and do something else, right? It's like, hey, yeah, how often do you go to the gym? Yeah, once a month. But if I watched you, it might be, or once a week. If I watched you, it might be more like once a month. And then finally, there's needs-based segmentation where you're actually segmenting different market segments based on the needs that they have. Like segment A has needs 1 and 2. Segment B also has need 1. They don't have need 2, but they have need 3. And the needs-based is the one that tends to be the most causally related. But behavioral and psychographic can be powerful too, right? So people ask me, which should I use? Use them all. Like peel the onion using all of them. You cannot peel the onion too much. It's very rare to peel the onion too much. So that's what that looks like to get clear on your market segmentation. And then often we will then create a persona, which is like a fictional representation of a person that would be in that target market segment. And sometimes people get confused between personas and target market segments. I think the market segment is the most important strategic thinking to be done. The persona just helps personify it so people can, apply it day to day.
So what are some tactics that people can do to try and better understand that target market and those customer personas? Because obviously talking to people is a big part of it, but yes. what are some other tactics to really try and nail this? It's the first foundational layer, so you've got to get it right.
Well, the thing I like to say is that layers 1 and 2, the needs layer and target customer, are so intertwined. You're really doing discovery research on both at the same time, right? You're positing, hey, I think this set of people have this set of underserved needs. Let's go out and talk to 10 of them and see if it validates our hypothesis or not. And in the process of doing that, that's when you'll start to get clues like, oh, okay, well, we thought it was going to be e-commerce companies. But as we talk to e-commerce companies, some of them don't have this inventory issue because they actually don't manage their own inventory, but these other ones do. And that's how you get what you learn from discovery research, a salient attribute that you add to peel the onion one more layer, right? So it's in the process of talking to those people. Now, I will say there's two main types of research, right? There's at this stage discovery research where you're trying to understand your customers and their needs. Once you get to the top of the pyramid, you're going to have a mock-up, a prototype, or even if it's a live product, you're going to go out and test that with customers again. In a way, you want to spend enough time in discovery to point your gun in the right direction. Or as I used to work on submarines, torpedo. Like when you shoot a torpedo, it doesn't have to go exactly right at the boat. It can just be in the general, within plus or minus 20 degrees, and it'll get its way there. That's what discovery. I want you to hit the general vector. And then when you do the mock-ups, that's when you really get the learning, because you're showing the mock-ups to people or prototype people. That's when you're really going to get the learning. So you don't want to, you want to do some discovery research for sure, but you don't want to obsess about this. You want to just confirm some basic assumptions here, make a bet, go all the way to UX prototype and test with mock-ups basically.
So don't get stuck in the market for too long. You need to get into the product at some point.
Formal hypothesis, right? Because you can sit there. The other thing is people like a couple other mistakes that teams make is like, oh, why would we only go for men? That's excluding half the market. Let's do both, right? It's like, why would we? The temptation is to go for a larger market. But in Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, he makes a very compelling case. Time and again, successful products started with a very narrow niche, right? And then they expanded from there, like a wedge. You call it a wedge strategy, right? Start with a wedge. And I think there's also like a quote about like, make something that like 100 people absolutely love versus something that 10,000 people kind of like, right? Because you can always build and expand from the former.
So moving into the second layer of the pyramid then, the underserved needs. I know you talk about problem space versus solution space a lot. Yeah. So do you want to cover that and explore what underserved needs look like?
Yeah, basically, and this kind of comes from my engineering background. First off, I'm excited to hear more and more people talking about problem space than were back when I was first talking about it in public talks, like in 2006. But basically, problem space is a customer benefit, problem, or need that your product is intended to address, right? And then the ideas are there's this duality between problems and solutions, and they map to each other. A solution, in contrast, is a specific design or implementation to address that need. And what happens is people far too often just rush into solution space and say, let's build this feature. Let's do this. Let's do blockchain. Right? Is blockchain a problem or a solution? It's a solution. Usually it's the technology du jour. It's always a solution, right? AI, let's do AI. Is AI a solution or a problem? It's a solution, right? Deep learning, Bitcoin, whatever. It's usually people get excited about that, right? So, but the thing I like to point out is when you jump to a solution, you are jumping straight to the feature set layer. You're bypassing the first 3 layers and saying, I think we should just build this thing, right? And so you don't have that solid foundation, right? So and I also like to point out that, depending on the survey you read, over 80% of new products fail, over 90% of new products fail. There's 2 main reasons, in my opinion, why that happens. It's rarely execution of the idea, right? Oh, we didn't code it well, we didn't design it well. Usually those are not the issue. The issue is basically, you started with a solution. You never got clear on what customer problem. You got enamored with the technology and you thought, I think this is going to be cool. Let's do it, right? Like Segway is another example, for example, right? And you were never clear on the problem. And secondly, if you did identify the problem, did you validate that it was an underserved big opportunity or not? Or was it a low importance, which we can talk about more, right? So in here, the needs part talks about starting with problems before solutions. The underserved talks about, okay, what I like to do is explore the problem space with your team, suspend disbelief and judgment, brainstorm what are all the different ways we could help these customers with this onion of market opportunity needs. Try to expand it, explore it as much as you can. Then you can clean it up and dedupe it and organize it by benefit ladders, what I call defining your problem space. Once you've got that problem space definition, we still haven't evaluated any of these yet, right? So that's where the importance versus satisfaction framework comes in, where you score for each of these needs for that customer. Again, it's a function of the customer. If you do it for different customers, you're going to get different importance scores and satisfaction scores. How important is this need, low to high? And how satisfied are they with how they're getting it met today, low to high? And you end up with 4 quadrants. The whole point is you want to avoid going after trying to address any low importance needs, because low importance needs don't create much customer value. High importance needs create customer value, right? And so again, nobody does it on purpose. They go and say, let's build this solution, not realizing that it either doesn't solve a problem or it solves a low importance problem, right? And then the other 2 interesting quadrants are high importance, high satisfaction. So high importance is better than low importance, but it's high satisfaction. So people are telling you, yeah, it's an important need, but I already have a solution that I'm happy with. That's a really tough quadrant to compete in. That's basically a competitive market. And that's where you kind of need some breakthrough disruptive innovation, right? You hear people say you need to be 10x better than the competition. That's where you need to be 10x better. The quadrant where you don't necessarily need to be 10x better is in the upper left, which is the opportunity quadrant. So you have high importance and low satisfaction. So customers are literally telling you, yes, this is a very important need, and I have not yet found a solution. The solution I'm using today is low satisfaction, or I've not found a high satisfaction one, right? And that's where opportunities lie. So if you do nothing else, first start with problems before you do solutions. Run this quick, you can do it with Post-it notes with your team without talking to any customers, and try to find a need that's in the upper left quadrant for that segment. If you do those two things, you're going to de-risk your risk of failure significantly. So it's kind of like my two main tips, having taught my workshops so many times, like those are the two main things. If you take nothing else away, just do that. And then now it's a simple matter of execution because you found a need that's going to create a lot of value.
So how do you validate that need as well? You're kind of essentially establishing benefits at this point. So yeah, how do you get some validation at this point and some evidence that it's worth taking it to the value proposition piece next?
Well, I mean, there's multiple ways. You can infer from customer comments, right? If you're, say you're trying to build a better Salesforce and you go and you interview 10 Salesforce users, you ask them what they like, what they don't like, how satisfied are they overall. If they tell you, I'm not that satisfied with it, or here are the problems I'm running into, that's evidence that supports there's an opportunity to deliver higher satisfaction, right? On the importance front, you come up with like, say, 6 to 8 or 10 needs. You ask them to score the importance on a numerical scale for the purposes of the research, right? Or you can ask them to rank order them. Are there ways to kind of get them to differentiate these, right? And to tie it back to customer, that's one of the ways you actually know you haven't peeled the onion on your customer. Say you go out and you show your mock-up of your e-commerce solution to 10 e-commerce people, and 5 absolutely love it, and 5 are like, no, it doesn't meet my needs. That is a clue that you have not segmented your market adequately enough. You're missing some selling. Your job is to be Sherlock Holmes and figure out, what am I missing? Why do these 5 love it and these 5 don't? And for example, it might be, again, because, hey, our solution that we're showing doesn't really solve complex inventory needs. And the 5 that loved it don't actually manage their own inventory, so it's not an issue, but the other 5 do, so it's an issue, right? So that might be an example.
I was curious on this as well, because how important is the knowledge of your competitors? Are you getting that through the intel that you're getting from potential customers and non-customers? Do you need to go off and explore what the competitors are doing and diving into their products, or can you actually just get everything from the customer?
Well, you'd be surprised. So, because I get hired to do this work for companies, right? And the startup will hire me and they'll be like, yeah, here's our 2 competitors or 3 competitors. I'm like, okay, cool. We start doing discovery interviews. All of a sudden, interview 1, some new competitor we didn't even know about. Interview 2, some other new competitor. I'm like, whoa. And you go to their sites and it's like, yep, they're right in the wheelhouse of what we're doing, right? So I do think you can. I don't like to look at competitors too soon, right? It's kind of one of the things that when people are default to solution-based thinking, and especially sales teams do this, you start to get in these feature checklist wars. They've got these 12 features. We got to match them on these 12 or else, right? It's kind of like copying your neighbor's homework or test. You're assuming they're smarter than you are. You're assuming they know what they're doing. And I guarantee they are not. Most companies are not doing it the way of this pyramid, right? That's why we're teaching it as best practices, right? They're just doing it, right? So you don't want to just copy things, right? So, and again, part of why Intuit was so successful is because we didn't really focus on competitors too much. We had Microsoft was our competitor. We're one of the few companies to fend off Microsoft. They're notorious for eventually grinding people down, and it's because we were close to our customers. So, the way that competition comes in right now is the satisfaction score really correlates with the solution, right? Let's say, you're using a certain kind of marketing software. Well, if certain people are using HubSpot, they're probably going to give more or less the same satisfaction scores for HubSpot. Someone else is using something else like Intercom. They're going to, you know what I mean? So it comes in a little bit in the satisfaction. One way to think about it is, where's the high watermark? Which competitor is delivering the highest satisfaction level for each of these needs? And it could be different competitors for different needs, right? Okay, HubSpot's the best at this, meaning this need. They're delivering 7 out of 10 on satisfaction. Intercom's the best at this need. They're delivering 8 out of 10 on this need, right? When we get to value prop, which is next layer, that's when we explicitly take the competition into account. But at this point, we're trying to just see what is possible and what are the underserved needs based in the marketplace.
I spoke to Itamar Galad, who's an author of a book called Evidence Guided, and he was one of the product managers working on the Google Plus suite when they were working on that at Google. And obviously that failed pretty spectacularly before he went onto the Gmail side. But I think that's a great example of not identifying the underserved needs correctly as well, because they built this whole vision of this social platform integrated with email, but it wasn't important to them at all. So
I think it's solutions-based. It's solutions-based thinking. And Google Wave, right? And I think there was Google Buzz, right? I mean, it's just, and it's just like, okay, Facebook's a competitor. They have a social network. We need a social network. That is pure solutions-based thinking, right? A social network, saying we need to build a social network, is saying we need a solution, like we need a widget. You're not saying how, anyway, so it's
expensive lesson for everyone.
The Zoom, right? The Zoom, we need a MP3 player too, right? So if, Amazon tried to do a phone. Okay, we're competing with Google, Android, and so that, it's okay to do that, but you're in that upper right quadrant. You got to figure out how you get the value product strategy layer becomes critical at that point, because people are not going to switch from something they're happy with unless you have a compelling value prop that adds more value.
Well, into the value proposition then.
Yes.
What does that look like in the pyramid in terms of your approach?
Yeah. On the value prop, there's one preliminary step before we get to the one-page tool. There's two one-page tools, if you will. The first is the Kano model, right? And I learned about this actually before I even came out of Silicon Valley in industrial engineering grad degree program. And this came out of kind of the car manufacturing quality movements back in the 80s. And it's another way to think about customer needs and satisfaction, which is what I think about deeply. I think that at the end of the day, that's the kind of stuff you need to think about. And it really, at the end of the day, it's a categorization scheme where you have must-have, and I won't go into the details. I have talks online, but basically there are must-have needs without which the customer won't buy your product, but they don't actually make anybody happy. There's performance needs and benefits where more is better, less is worse. This is where most of the competition happens, right? We're 10% faster. We're 20% cheaper. We have 30% higher quality. Whatever it is, you can quantify, what's going on. And then finally, delighters, which not having a delighter doesn't cause a problem, but by having a delighter, it can create a lot of positive value, right? So that's the deal. And then what we do is we throw it into a table, what I call the product strategy grid or value prop grid. And we list for your market category, one per row, all the must-have benefits, the performance benefits, and delighter benefits. And you can see I've kept it generic here, right? So that's the first thing you do is you populate the rows with the benefits categorized by must-have, performance, delighter. Second step is you populate the columns with your competitors. Who are our competitors? And then you add a column at the right for your own product. Then you score your competitors, right? You say, how good a job are they doing on each of these benefits? And honestly, low, medium, high is usually adequate. You don't need to get too specific. If there are numerical things like megahertz or whatever, you can put it in there if you want. It's fine for performance benefits. And then now is the tough call where you need to analyze the competition and say, how can we deliver more value than them? Where can we be higher than whoever's here, right? And so when I run these workshops, any row where nobody else is high, that's a possible candidate for us to be high. Oh no, everyone else is low and or medium. We could be high there, right? That's the obvious kind of thing. The other thing is someone may be high, but you have some technology why you think you can be higher. That's kind of like a disruptive technology. Or the other way to go is, they're high, but we can offer the same thing at a lower price. So it's kind of price quality trade-off so it's kind of the three ways you can outperform somebody in the product strategy grid, right? And the whole point of this is to come up with your unique differentiators, which are what is the one performance benefit? And usually it's just one, right? And when I run this exercise, I love to bring up the Steve Jobs quote where he says, focus means saying no. I'll summarize it. And that's my favorite definition of strategy. Strategy means saying no. Again, to poke some fun at our friends in sales, when they call on prospective clients and the client says, hey, is your product going to have feature A? What do they say? They always say yes because they have an incentive to do so to get their quota, right? If you're saying yes to every possible customer request, then you're not being strategic. And I've worked with several companies that hire me because they've got into a bind. They're like, we're basically a custom software shop, Dan. We do not have a true unified product. We do not have a platform. We want to get out of this trap. It's because they've been saying yes to all these random client queries along the way. And I get it. If you're a startup, you need revenue. So I call it chasing revenue. But you want to try to apply a strategic lens to it. So things that align with your product strategy, you say yes to. Things that are kind of 180 degrees away, you say no to. Also, back to target customer, if you're building this for this one law firm, double check that it's not some anomaly that's just for them. Like, this is just the way they do it. We went and talked to 5 other lawyers. None of them have that need. So we don't want to build that, right? Anyway, usually it's one performance benefit. And then, if you're fortunate, you can also have a unique delighter. And so the whole point here is to get clarity on this, so that in going into the next step, this is still a hypothesis. Going into the next step, when we specify our feature set, it better deliver on performance benefit 3 and delighter benefit 2, which are the foundations of our value prop, right? So basically, that it helps us decide what to put in the MVP to then mock up to go test with people.
Before we move on to the actual feature set, can you maybe describe an example just in terms of what that strategy grid might look like for an existing product? Or I've heard you talk about Instagram before, I think, actually, when they launched that.
Well, the other example, and what I like to do, Instagram is not in the book, but I use it in my workshop, and I use it in a couple of talks where I focus on this topic. It's because these companies that were wildly successful shared some documents from their early company history that showed that this was not just, some people are like, they just got lucky, right? The opposite of doing what I'm proposing is kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks and trying to get lucky, right? That's what happens when you just build feature after feature after feature. It's like the feature death trap. It's like, okay, people don't like our product, add more features. Oh, no one's using it still, add more features. You keep going back and forth, right? So another example was Uber, right? So Uber was competing against taxis and limousines. And I also show that as an example of an upper left quadrant opportunity, right? The need to be driven somewhere, when you need to be driven somewhere, say to the airport or for a medical procedure, how important is that? Most people score that pretty high importance. The alternative that most people would use before Lyft and Uber came out was taxis. And if I ask people satisfaction for taxis, there are certain parts of the world like Manhattan or London, perhaps, where it's like public transportation. But most of the US, for example, you have to call and they wouldn't show up and all this jazz. So for a lot of reasons, it would be high importance and low satisfaction. And I think that's part of why they were able to create so much more value and be so successful. But if you look at there's one slide in particular from their deck where they list out taxi. It's actually the closest to this grid that I've seen. I mean, Instagram kind of pretty much said it. They both get an A+ for product strategy. This was not luck. This was not throwing spaghetti at the wall. They knew exactly what they were doing. There's a slide in their deck that says taxis are bad at X and Y, limos are bad at A and B. We're gonna be cleaner and faster, cheaper, and safer. Like they literally put those 4 words in, which are every once in a while, if you do my workshop, you'll learn I'm a grammar geek. I like to start my benefit statements with verbs. And I ask people, what are those 4 words from the Uber pitch deck? And they're adjectives, specifically comparative adjectives. They are saying how they're going to outperform taxis and limos, specifically on that slide, right? So you can create that. And the interesting thing there is it's a rare example where they actually were shooting to outperform on 3 benefits. Right? Usually it's just 1. But because the situation was so horrible with taxis so far in the upper left quadrant, they actually could do 3, right? And the interesting thing is, if you read it, they did not initially plan to be cheaper than taxi cabs, right? It was the initial concept, and actually I just watched Super Pumped on Netflix, which was, I highly recommend checking it out. They did a great job. If you're a startup person or tech person, super cool to watch out. But watch it. The initial idea was like, it was all this one black Mercedes sedan. It was like meant to be like kind of not a limo, but kind of high end, not just any car. So they actually did not intend originally to be cheaper than taxis. They were trying to offer you a limo-like experience at a lower price than a limo with the convenience of hailing and things like that, right? So over time, they eventually became cheaper than taxis and so outperformed on 4 dimensions instead of just 3. So that's another example.
So from that then, let's dive into the solution space. The feature set into the UX and the product side. How do you visualize that? What are the key components to explore in that layer?
The key thing on the feature set is you do directed brainstorming. Okay, we said in our value prop and we want to be cheaper than limos. What are we going to do to deliver on that, right? We said we want to be more convenient than taxis. What are we going to do to deliver on that, right? That's basically, so the key is you don't just throw everything out you just did. Each step builds on the previous steps. And so now you have this solid, well thought through foundation of why we believe this set of benefits to focus on is going to make us best in the marketplace. Well, now we want to brainstorm what features should we, now we can say, great, to deliver on that benefit that's the number 1 in our value prop, let's brainstorm suspend judgment and disbelief. What are all the different feature solution ideas we have for that? And you go through each feature, each benefit, and you do that brainstorming, right? Then, and I always like to encourage people to circle back and try to break those ideas down, because usually when you first brainstorm a feature idea, it's bigger than it needs to be. So I call that chunking or feature chunks. And then you can run ROI. Some people probably this whole time running, well, when are we going to take into account engineering effort? Yeah. Well, now's when we do it, because now we know why we're building this feature, and now we scope it, and then we run ROI. And this is where you also figure out your MVP. This is where MVP comes in, right? We don't want to overscope before we confirm that we're heading in the right direction. That's a mistake that a lot of teams make, right? Which is ironic, because the whole point of an MVP is to not overscope things. So you make the tough calls, and then you move on. Once you've identified the MVP feature set, and you kind of create a mini roadmap, again, a one-page roadmap showing what's in V1 versus the future versions, then you go and you mock it up and prototype it, and you show it to customers, basically, right? And that's where we get into the it's basically lean product process. Then you get to step 6, where you test that with customers to see how you're doing with product market fit. You adjust. You're going to learn from that. You're going to adjust the customer. You're going to adjust the needs. You're going to adjust your value prop. You're going to adjust your features. You're going to adjust your UX, and you iterate, basically. Yeah.
What's your opinion on different types of MVP? Because there's many different approaches to it. Some people just have a landing page with a button that says "I'm interested," or you have a fully built prototype that's interactive. So, what was your thought? How far do you need to go, and how quickly? And what are the factors that change that as well?
Yeah, I mean, MVP is, I think, without a doubt, the most divisive idea or concept in our product world. And so, actually, I have in my talks, I've developed a spectrum along the lines of what you're saying, starting with a landing page at the low end, all the way up to live working product at the other end, with things like static mockups, interactive prototypes, alpha, things like things like that in between. The point is to get clear on what is a hypothesis we want to test, right? If it's your value proposition, then yes, you can use a landing page to test it, right? Right? You could say, hey, we think that this is going to be better than cabs and limos. Let's make a landing page and go run it by 20 people or 10 people to use taxis and 10 people to use limos and see what they say, right? So you can do that at that point. That's more of like a marketing test, right? So that's what divides people. Is most people, the hardcore MVP people, are like, Dan, the P stands for product. A landing page is not a product. You can't use a landing page. And so that's why that kind of goes, right? And that side of the spectrum is more about testing your hypotheses and learning. So if you've got that kind of a view of an MVP, it tends to be more inclusive. If you like, it's got to be a product, it tends to be more restrictive, which is why some people are like, let's not use that word. I'm like, that doesn't make anything better. So I like to just go up one level and call them all MVP tests or experiments. And then it's like we can reserve MVP for the ones that the hardcore product people would call an MVP. And we can call landing page and other stuff like tests or experiments.
So you talk about closing the loop in the book as well. So can you describe what comes at the end of this pyramid? You get to the top, you've got something, you're starting to validate stuff. Is it start back at the bottom, validate back to the target customer? What's the closing the loop process?
You might get delta. So that's why my advice is to get to step 6 as quickly as you can, which really means step 5. But really get through the first loop as quickly as you can. Get to that, have the debates, make the calls, get to that set of prototypes or mockups, Figma, whatever it is, and then go test. Because that's really when you really start to learn. You're going to learn in discovery interviews, but until you have a solution you put in front of people, there's only so much you can do, right? And so then it'll be like, oh yeah, I like this, I don't like this, and that's when the iteration starts. I mean, to your question, you could be completely off. You could be in the completely wrong direction, talking to the wrong customer about the wrong needs, and it'll be like, it'll fall completely flat. And you're like, ooh, what do we do, right? Hopefully, there's usually some adjacent market, right? Or you realize there's subsets. Hey, we're talking to accountants. 3 out of the 10 we talked to really like it, but 7 didn't. Let's go figure out what the heck is it about those 3. We're going to further segment the accountant market to get clear on what it is these 3 like, right? Or you might realize, oh, we targeted the wrong benefit, or we're missing some key feature, right? That's the idea. So again, it's like Sherlock Holmes. Your job is to figure out what it is, right? And it can be tough, especially at first, because things like bad UX can get in the way of people really seeing the value of your features. If you've got bad UX, it's kind of like the outer layer rust that you have to kind of polish off before you can get. I've seen this happen, right? And that, it's a good reminder that UX feedback is distinct from value prop feedback, right? But the UX can, again, if any of these layers is off, UX is one of them, it'll preclude people. It doesn't matter if you have the most amazing features that solve the best problems in the world. If you have a bad UX and people can't use it, you're not going to get credit for it. It's not going to create value.
So now that we've gone through the whole pyramid, what's changed? I mean, obviously you host a lot of meetups through the Lean Product Meetup, and you talk to a lot of people. You've done a lot of consultancy. Moving into 2024 now,
Yeah.
What's different in the product space? You've got this pyramid, which is pretty robust in terms of standing the test of time. So
Yes.
in terms of the tools or whatever else has changed in the
Yeah.
landscape today, what's different?
Yeah, no, it's definitely evergreen. People always say, what would you change? I'm like, well, it's the same thing. Don't you still have customers who have needs? The good news is the tools have evolved, right? So specifically in UX, right? Back in the day, you would have a designer create things in Photoshop, Illustrator, Sketch, and then you have a bunch of image files you have to figure out what to do with. And most people would upload them to InVision and then go in and manually create little rectangle hotspots and string together a multi-page, multi-screen prototype. Well, Figma has made that significant. It's all integrated with Figma, right? So Figma, it's never been easier to have a more robust prototype with less work. You still need a designer, right? It's not the PM's best use of time to be creating Figma stuff. You still need a design resource to do it. So that's something that's accelerated for sure, right? You see that. And it's a very interesting case study to be like, well, Photoshop and Illustrator were dominating. And then Sketch came along and seemed to dominate. And then all of a sudden Figma came along and, it dominated that. So it's like, how did Sketch, a product strategy exercise would be like, what did Sketch do to miss that? But that's one. The other thing is on the recruiting side of things here, right? Back in the day, you literally would have to find people nearby where you lived. And we did that. And there were firms that would do that. The cool news is now you can do it online. And with Zoom, right? So you can talk to people. It's never been easier to reach your target customer. And so there are multiple companies. I think userresearch.com is one that focuses on that. There's obviously been a lot of movement in this space too, user testing, right? And user Zoom. There's all kinds of companies that help with this. If you just need recruiting help, there are people that can just help you recruit. Hey, I'm going to pay you $30 and you're going to find some people. And then you're good to go. So that's good. And then it's never been easier to do the interviews because they don't have to drive to you. You don't have to drive to them. So those are some of the things that have been, really, I think, that make the job easier, right? And then on the coding front, on the building front, obviously, the tools keep advancing to make coding easier. And that's where you get into Gen AI stuff. How can Gen AI help, right? Gen AI can help generate code. Last night in my meetup, Amy Jo Kim talked about how she can use Gen AI to generate storyboards. So instead of a set of mockups, you would kind of storyboard the user experience, like a comic book sketch kind of, right? So it would be less about the details of the UI, but more at the value prop layer and the feature set layer. Like you could do that, right? So I think it's interesting, using Gen AI. What I like to do, so I talked about the problem space, solution space lately. Both of those are example of what's called a possibility space. And then in math is a concept of a possibility space. For example, if you roll a dice, the possibility space is 1 through 6, right? That's the idea. And so that's part of it too. And so I think what's good is Gen AI can help you explore possibility spaces and find things you didn't know about before. What it's not good at is helping you evaluate and say, great, out of these 20 things you just suggested, which one should I do, right? So it's great for exploring and thinking of things you wouldn't have thought of that can also inspire other things that you wouldn't have thought of. And so I see people using it. They're trying to use it in these early stages to try to help identify market opportunities as well.
In my day-to-day as a B2B product manager, I obviously use a lot of tools and I see these little AI features being integrated into more and more of them. There's a little button in the corner that says, do something which has AI. And some of them are great. And actually, I can totally understand why they've implemented it and it has saved me time or whatever else the benefit has to be. But a number of them are just nice to haves. And I look at them and I think, well, that's a shiny little bit of functionality, but I don't use it. It's not useful for me. So I think that's maybe a testament to, again, going through the earlier layers of the pyramid and saying, actually, is this a benefit that people care about? Is this something we should build? So I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yeah, it's the technology du jour, right? The stakeholder is in the shower or drives into work and here's a podcast about Gen AI. They come in and say, guys, what do we have for AI in our roadmap? Let's add something. That's what happens, right? It's copying. It's just, there's this hot trend. Let's do it. It's the same thing happened with blockchain. People were slapping on blockchain, all kinds of stuff where it didn't make sense. So now people feel compelled because they don't want to be perceived as missing the boat or not having it. And so someone, there's that icon that's being used, that's being slapped around everywhere. It's just, hey, this is the magic AI icon. Click here. And I think people are just slapping it on in many cases without saying, what user problem can this thing solve in a way that's better than what our current product does, or how can it augment the current product experience versus just let's slap it on there.
Yeah, but doing the right things at the right time for the right people. I think that's the key takeaway, that the pyramid enables and justifies and validates. So I think that's very, very much evergreen, as you put it earlier on. So yeah, Dan, thank you so much for guiding us through the pyramid. I mean, I understand there's a huge depth into each layer, which you go into in a lot more detail in the book and other lectures you've done, of course. But in terms of where people can find you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, the single best place is my website, which is my name, dan-olsen.com. So it's dan-olsen.com. I've got links there to my most popular talks, my speaking schedule. I love, the conferences that I'll be speaking at, the workshops that I'm teaching. There's also a link there to the Lean Product Meetup that I run. That used to be in person only. It's 10 years ago that I started. I've been doing it every month for 10 years. And before COVID, it was always in person here in Silicon Valley. With COVID, we had to take it 100% online, which actually was cool because we got people all over. You don't have to live within an hour of Mountain View, California anymore. So we got people all over the States and Central and South America, Canada, Europeans that are willing to stay up a little late. And then we got the Kiwis and the Aussies because it's like midday for them. So it worked out great. So we have over 12,000 people in that community. Anyway, each month I host a speaker. You can get to that meetup.com/lean-product, or again, for my website. And then I have a YouTube channel where I post my talks that I give and fireside chats that I do and things like that. That's youtube.com/Dan Olsen, just my name again, DANOLSEN. And then the other thing that I put on there is all the people that I host at Lean Product Meetup, like Marty, Cagan, and Teresa Torres, and Geoffrey Moore. Their videos are up there too, along with fireside chats that I would do with them, their talks. We split them out usually. And we have almost 20,000 subscribers to that YouTube channel. So it's like one of the top YouTube channels. Tends to be longer form. Like the talks tend to be like 35 to 55 minutes. So people go really in depth. I don't like to rush my speakers. I want them to cover what they want to cover. Lots of Q&A. We had a very engaged Q&A last night. And then I'm on LinkedIn, of course. And then, my book, Lean Product Playbook's on Amazon. It's available in English, Kindle, Audible. It's available in Chinese, Polish, Thai.
Great stuff. Well, thanks again. I'll leave links as well in the show notes, of course. But thank you so much. And speak soon, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Adam. It was great to talk with you.
You've been listening to the Product Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to leave a follow on your preferred podcast platform, as well as subscribe on YouTube. It's really appreciated and helps to grow the channel into the future. I'll see you in the next episode.